Thank you for joining us. I am Jennifer Rice, the MLA for North Coast Haida Gwaii, and BC's Parliamentary Secretary for Rural Health. It is my privilege to be here with all of you on the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our speakers today, Premier David Eby, Nathan Cullen, Minister of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, Eddie Adra, CEO of the Coast Conservation Endowment Fund Foundation, Dallas Smith, President of the Nanwakolas Council, and Gauji Marilyn Slett, President of Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative, and Chief Counselor of the Halsik First Nation. I'm excited to MC this event today for a couple of reasons. Pardon me. One is that I live in Prince Rupert on Tsimshian territory, and I have the honor of representing the vast majority of the First Nations within the Great Bear Rainforest territory. Not all, but most. And so that is an area that includes Prince Rupert, the North Coast First Nations, Haida Gwaii, all the way down the Central Coast to a small community called Wekino, which is just north of Port Hardy. And in a previous life before being MLA, I worked on conservation programs with a couple of different ENGOs, including the World Wildlife Fund as my start, back in the day when we talked about this region within a very difficult acronym called PANSEMA. But nonetheless, I am so happy that this work is coming to fruition finally, and I get to be a part of announcing good progress on it today. So for now, I would like to invite Premier Eby to tell you about an important funding initiative on the North Coast, a beautiful region of our province that's very close to my heart. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. It's a privilege to be here on the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people for such an important announcement today about our work in partnership with Indigenous people. We're at the, I don't know if people at home can see it, but we're at the Maritime Museum. You know, you can feel the weight of coastal history here in British Columbia. You know, thousands of children finding the words poop deck totally hilarious over the years. I'm here all day. It's an amazing place to be. We're here. You can see the waters behind us. It's not the Great Bear Sea, but it's a reminder of the importance of the coast to all British Columbians. Whether it's about recreation, about getting a kayak out there, some people cold water swimming, other people fishing, or just standing on the shore and appreciating the beauty of the amazing place where we live. The coast and our waters are so important economically, fisheries, recreationally, tourism. So this announcement today is important to British Columbians across the province for many, many different reasons. Now, there are people who say that we need to make a choice in British Columbia between protecting our environment and protecting our economy and advancing our economy. It's a false choice. And today's announcement is about how we demonstrate that that's a false choice. British Columbia has taken important action to protect our environment. Everything from our Clean BC plan to make sure that we're reducing carbon pollution, improving the quality of our air for our kids, and ensuring that we're investing in the next generation of technologies to grow our economy. Adding value to our natural resources like wood, to our mass timber initiatives, building homes out of BC wood products, ensuring low carbon building while maximizing the value from our forests, protecting habitat and old growth while at the same time ensuring that we have a sustainable wood industry, all while leading Canada's economic recovery post-pandemic, and last month, leading the country in private sector job creation. People say we can't do it. We are doing it right here in British Columbia. Yet we know that there's so much more to do, both economically and to protect our environment. We've been told that BC has the second highest number of threatened ecosystems in Canada, and we are home to the most incredible biodiversity of the entire country. This is why it's so important that we continue to do this important work. and why I'm so proud to announce today that we are providing $60 million in grant funding to Coast Funds. That $60 million is expected to leverage a further $200 million in private funds, all aimed at protecting and extending the Great Bear Rainforest to the Great Bear Sea, taking those protections and partnerships between First Nations, industry, and community of the Great Bear Rainforest and applying them in the marine environment of the Great Bear Sea, ensuring that we have a healthy ecosystem that provides more fish for the fisheries, that provides more tourism opportunities for the tourists, that provides more protection for the natural systems that we all depend on for our lives, creating good new jobs and economic opportunities for everybody, and doing it in partnership with First Nations. There's one thing that we've learned really over the last number of years through the pandemic is that to take on big fights, to deliver big results, we actually need to do it together as a province in partnership. And today's announcement is no exception. This announcement is about the provincial government, First Nations government, industry, communities, all working together to deliver results for our beautiful province to ensure it's here for generations to come. With that, I'd like to thank my colleague, Jen Rice, who in her life before politics spent many, many years advocating for this exact kind of marine planning to ensure we have a prosperous province for all different people across the province and wild ecosystems protected for generations to come. Thank you, Jen. Thanks for joining us. And with that, I'd like to pass it back to you.
Thank you, Premier. Nathan Cullen will now provide additional details about this funding and the importance to the communities on the North Coast.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be here on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh People's Territory. As the Premier mentioned, British Columbia has the greatest diversity of species, ecosystems, and habitats of any province or territory in Canada. We have always been a leader in conservation because we have the greatest responsibility to the stewardship of that biodiversity. This $60 million grant is a significant provincial contribution to the ongoing stewardship of the Northern Shelf Bioregion, also known as the Great Bear Sea. Since time immemorial, First Nations have been the stewards of its land, water, and natural wealth. This area of extraordinary beauty, extending south from Alaska, including Haida Gwaii and the central coast of British Columbia, is often called the Galapagos of the North. Today, we are taking a crucial step forward together to improve its stewardship, help fund conservation initiatives, and support jobs in the communities. The $60 million grant from our BC government will be administered by the Coast Conservation Endowment Fund, also known as Coast Funds. This grant will provide stable funding for First Nations, for coastal marine conservation projects, and to work on those projects for years and years to come. It will help First Nations expand monitoring, guardian programs, and the management of marine protected areas. It will also support the Marine Plan Partnership for the North Pacific Coast and the Marine Protected Area Network Action Plan. There's many acronyms when you deal with coastal environments, which was announced earlier this year at the International Marine Protected Areas Congress, Impact 5, here in Vancouver. This is a great example of how government-to-government collaborations can restore back the health of our marine ecosystems and support local jobs at the same time. As the Premier said, it is often presented as a false choice to conserve or to build up our economy, and we know we can, and in fact we must do both. This funding also supplements commitments from our federal partners to fund Indigenous-led conservation initiatives and other philanthropic investments and interests in the Great Bear Sea. We're magnifying our support with funding from Canada and those philanthropic groups. Our government will continue to work with First Nations, the federal government, local communities, and other partners to achieve our conservation goals. This is a very good day for our coast, for coastal peoples, and for all Canadians who treasure this beautiful place. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Please welcome Eddie Adra, the CEO of Coast Conservation Endowment Fund Foundation, also known as Coast Funds.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here today on Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh territory with our partners to announce the province of British Columbia's support for First Nations stewardship and planning in the Great Bear Sea. My name is Eddie Adra. Oops. And I need to hold my paper more closely. My name is Eddie Adra, and I'm the CEO at Coast Funds, an Indigenous-led conservation finance organization that was created through the Great Bear Rainforest Agreements to manage and deliver funding for First Nations stewardship and economic development opportunities on the coast. This $60 million contribution from the province will support the implementation of collaborative, multi-use marine plans developed through the Marine Planning Partnership. This work brings together knowledge holders and scientific experts from First Nations and the province, along with inputs from important stakeholder groups like the fisheries and tourism, to support marine conservation and sustainable development on BC's north and central coast. In tandem with that planning work, First Nations have worked with the province and federal governments, as well as other partners, to plan the network of marine protected areas in the Great Bear Sea. These plans will help rebuild fisheries, safeguard habitats for whales, fish, and other seabirds, and create new economic opportunities for everyone on the coast. One thing I've learned by working with leaders like Dallas and Maryland is that lines and blobs on maps don't protect places. People do. That's why First Nations are working with partners to develop a project finance for permanence, also known as PFP for short, that can fund guardian and stewardship programs, as well as community development and new businesses in coastal communities. Part of the province's contribution will be used to help build the funding nations need to protect the Great Bear Sea for generations to come. First Nations have already proven that combining ecosystems protection along with long-term funding works both for people and places. 15 years ago, the province contributed $30 million towards the creation of Coast Funds, the world's first PFP, and First Nations have used financing that, along with contributions from the federal government and private funders, to invest over $110 million in more than 450 conservation, stewardship, and economic development projects in the Great Bear Rainforest and Haida Gwaii. That's significant. Those investments have attracted nearly $300 million in additional funding and investments to the region. That's a 4-to-1 return if you're thinking from an investment perspective. But that's also created over 1,250 jobs with more than 120 new and expanded businesses and helped to diversify local economies, benefiting everybody on the coast. In real terms, those investments have translated into local salaries, language and cultural revitalization, training and education programs, new infrastructure, and the growth of guardian and stewardship programming, which protects the ecosystem we all rely on. Today's announcement, which brings another $60 million to the region, will help First Nation build on their successes. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. I will now ask Dallas Smith, President of the Nanokalis Council, to say a few words.
Gaelakasla, Nuguam, Wolkene, Gaxtlas, Gaelakasla, Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh. Another great day for British Columbia. In the Great Bear Rainforest, we protected 6.4 million hectares that created 1,100 full-time jobs in a conservation community. We've shown that through collaboration and working together with all the levels of government, making sure we hear the voices of the stakeholders and the people of the coast, that we can continue to do more. We can continue to do better. It's a tremendous honor to stand here on this podium today and talk about the closure of the circle. For far too long, people thought First Nations were simply part of systems. over the years, we've illustrated how healthy First Nations communities make healthy ecosystems. We're in our third generation of stewardship in this Great Bear Rainforest discussion, and to be able to stand here today and to bring that closure towards the PFP for the marine component of the Great Bear Sea. I remember when we did the Great Bear Rainforest agreements in 2007, going home to expect fanfare from the communities, and the elders pulled me aside and said, "Don't sprain your arm patting yourself on the back until you've done the marine component, because we are ocean people." And so today we've made a tremendous step forward for the plights of coastal communities. And we've learned that this model that we're building in conservation finance, that's showing another way of managing people and resources, is a world model that can be transferred around the world. And so it's a great opportunity to be here today to look at a future that will bring 2,000 full-time jobs in the marine environment. It'll bring an MPA strategy that's endorsed by the province of British Columbia, the government of Canada, and coastal First Nations. So I want to thank our partners for making this available today, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Gaila Kessler.
Thank you, Dallas. Now, please welcome. I'm so sorry, Marilyn Slett, but I want to Guiji. How did I do, Marilyn? Gawiji. She's only one of my chiefs. I'm in so much trouble. So please welcome Gawiji Marilyn Slett, President of Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative and Chief Counselor of the Halsik First Nation.
Good morning. It's really an honor to be here representing our coastal communities. And, like my colleague had said, it's a really good day for our communities. Represents decades of work that brought us here, and we're honored to be here with the Premier here today and his colleagues, Nathan and Jennifer. Coastal First Nations and the Nanawakilis Council welcome the province's investment to support our work in marine conservation and stewardship for the Great Bear Sea. It represents some of the world's healthiest remaining oceans. These marine territories encompass a wide range of diverse habitats from open ocean, deep fjords, and vibrant estuaries. First Nations have governed and stewarded the Great Bear Sea for at least 14,000 years. Our traditional knowledge tells us that the right to use and benefit our waters can never be separated from the responsibility to care for them. I remember my uncle Cyril saying that if we take care of the ocean will take care of us. The health of our people and communities is inseparable from the health of the ocean, of coastal and marine ecosystems. The province's support will help us set a new standard for ocean conservation and collaborative management. Working together will create a blueprint for protecting ecosystems based on Indigenous knowledge and Western science. It will also help us protect and rebuild fish stocks and the habitats that they depend on. It will help us to safeguard the future of endangered and iconic species and to care for sensitive sites in special places. It will restore and uphold the health of abundance of this coast that we love and that so many communities and families depend on. Key to protecting our ocean is the work of the Guardian Watchmen. Our Guardian Watchmen are the leading edge of global movement towards Indigenous-led stewardship. Today, Guardians carry out their work of our ancestors conducting research, monitoring, and enforcement to ensure that resources are sustainably managed, that laws, plans, and agreements are followed, and that their communities and other mariners are safe. The challenges before us may seem daunting, but together we have the power to make transformational change. By embracing a mindset of marine stewardship and collaborative management, we can create a legacy of sustainability, as well as ensuring that future generations of our communities, the province, and the country inherit a planet that thrives with the richness of our oceans. Gaiaxica, thank you for letting us continue the journey of protecting our coast in a spirit of partnership, determination, and hope.
Gaiaxica Gawiji, Chief Slett, thank you for your words. If we take care of the ocean will take care of us. I think that's a really good sentiment to end on today. This concludes the formal portion of this morning's presentation, and I'm going to now turn it over to Hernani Miranda to assist with media questions and an opportunity to take photos of today's speakers. I want to thank you all for coming here today for this important announcement.
Thank you for joining us today. We have members of the media on the phone line. I'm going to encourage all members of the media who wish to ask a question to please press *1 to enter the queue. All members of the media will be limited to one question and one follow-up. We're going to begin with Wolf Deppner from Black Press. Go ahead, Wolf.
For taking my question. A question to the Premier, and I know it's just a word, so to speak, but yesterday you spoke of having election within 6 months and then later corrected yourself within having election of 10 months. So I have to ask the question, Freudian or something else?
Sorry, Wolf, absolutely. Ask the question, man. Oh, or was that it? Was that it? Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Freudian slip or just a mistake.
Thanks for the question, Wolf. I talk to a lot of British Columbians. They ask me about a lot of important issues that we're working on. They ask about housing. They ask about healthcare, schools, infrastructure. Not a single person says, "Can we have an election sooner?" And this is despite my stuttering over the right number of months before the next election at a press conference yesterday. I said 6 months. I meant 10 months. My family is expecting a significant event in 6 months in June, and it is not an election. And I can assure British Columbians that we will hold the election on the fixed election date, as I have committed on many occasions. I remain committed to that. We have too much to work on, too much to do to be playing politics right now.
And Wolf, do you have a follow-up question?
Can you give British Columbians an update on where the province stands in regards to its 30-30-30 goals? So obviously today, another announcement toward that goal. But can you sort of contextualize where the province stands right now in terms of that goal?
Sure, Wolf. I'll take that at a high level, then I'll pass over to Minister Cullen or one of our Indigenous partners. Today's announcement is a really important component of our commitment to ensure that 30% of British Columbia's land base is protected by 2030. And we often talk about the land base, but that excludes discussion of the need for marine planning and to ensure that we're protecting areas that are underwater that are just as vital to our survival economically, culturally, and just as humans as the protection of areas on land. When we protect fish habitat areas that are crucial to ensure the survival of species that are core to economic prosperity in our province, cultural prosperity in our province, we benefit all British Columbians. And marine planning and protection is as critical a part of our 30% commitment as on-land based protections. Mr. Cole?
Very briefly, and I think Dallas wants to add something as well. It's a good question. We believe we're approximately right around the 20% mark of protecting the land and waters of the province right now. As the Premier said, we have a very ambitious goal to protect 30% by 2030. This is an internationally leading benchmark. And the conservation is twofold. One is it is Indigenous-led conservation here in British Columbia under the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. We are governing ourselves this way. And secondly, the announcement of $60 million today is in addition to the little more than $1 billion that we've been able to raise for Indigenous-led conservation. This is the Guardian programs that Chief Slett talked about, the research, the governance, all of those pieces that we know go into the more comprehensive sense of conservation that we've come to evolve ourselves into thinking in this province. So this is another marker and an important one, and that integration of land and water, which are the First Nations partners that we work with have always told us that we need to do the both, because there is no difference in between the two in terms of the need to mend them together and keep our conservation goals front and center in mind. Dallas, did you want to add something?
Thank you, Mr. Cullen. I think it's important to draw upon some of the words shared earlier around the blob part is easy. It's easy to identify the area, but to lock these things in for the long-term legacy piece that's needed to combat climate change and other issues, we need to really find out how that balance works. And so we're working with all of our partners at the federal and provincial government to find out where our economic interests are so we can lock down these protected area interests for a long term. And that's a challenge because we have land questions in there. We have treaty processes in play, but these are all part of the discussion now. And that's why I'm so proud to be part of the Great Bear Rainforest, is where we've taken all these issues into consideration to make sure that we're not just trying to meet a benchmark, we're actually trying to achieve change on how the world's going to be managed. So it's a work in progress and we're all committed to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question will come from Alec Lazenby from BC Today. Go ahead, Alec.
Hi there. So my first question is just regarding Wolf's question as well. In terms of the draft framework that came out for biological conservation, in terms of the $1 billion conservation fund, I'm just wondering if Mr. Cullen or Premier Eby or whoever else wants to answer the question can just sort of explain how all these pieces fit together and help us reach our 2030 targets.
Thank you for the question. These are all pieces of the same puzzle coming together. As Dallas and Chief Slett talked about, the integration of our economic success as well as our conservation objectives fit together in all that we've announced. You mentioned the framework for biodiversity health. We know that certain ecosystems, watersheds have been degraded over time, often through industrial use, and we need to build them back while maintaining care and concern for the people who live there and making sure that people have the jobs that they can feed their families with, that they can look to future generations and say that we will leave the place better than we found it, and we will leave it more sustainable in terms of the jobs that we're able to create. Hence the need to make sure that we have economic support, funding from our federal partners, from philanthropic groups, and of course us as the province. So this vision that we have put forward to British Columbians, a new kind of conservation that Dallas talks about, integrating people into the conversation, and particularly Indigenous-led conservation, so that the rights and title holders of the land are the ones leading the conversation with us in partnership as a province and other groups that are interested in being in that conversation. So it is integrated. We are thinking about this, and that framework is out for comment right now until about the middle of January, and then we will be coming back to the people of BC with a new way of looking at resource extraction and conservation through that Indigenous-led lens.
In terms of a follow-up, Dallas mentioned the difficulty of, finding out where economic interests are, where projects are, figuring out where treaty processes are ongoing. How are the areas going to be, determined where protections are going to be placed? Because I've heard from different advocacy groups and different environmentalists that that's one of the keys of the biodiversity framework, is not simply protecting 30% of our lands, but making sure we're protecting the most invaluable ecosystems, the most vulnerable ecosystems, and making sure that it's really, truly making a difference.
Well, great question. I think it's important to understand that's why this has to be Indigenous-led. I think we've seen Indigenous communities work through spatial planning, both marine and terrestrially, to put a vision in place that others can respond to. In the old days, governments would put a plan together, and pre-Delgamuukw would put a plan together, but post-Delgamuukw would sit down with us and have discussions and deliberations. To now, First Nations communities are building their own spatial planning processes and bringing those to affected stakeholders, affected communities, and the governments of the day. So I think if we continue down that path, we're going to actually build that legacy piece that works. But it's also important to realize that the tools are changing on a regular basis. The Park Act had such negative connotations to it that First Nations were having a hard time embracing it. But through government-to-government deliberations, we invented the Conservancy Act. And for the marine protected areas, we're introducing Indigenous protected and conserved areas. But they all meet IUCN categories to make sure that the protection's valid and credible going forward for the global community. Thank you.
So incorporating the MPA network in our MAP marine plans, we developed these plans in partnership with Canada and BC over many years. And we have brought together stakeholders from coastal industries, including commercial fisheries, recreational fishermen, tourism, renewable energy, conservation, and others. So these plans are based on Indigenous knowledge and the best available science with input from knowledge from many sectors and coastal communities. And this is what makes these plans so strong, because they are made by our coast. They're made by the people that live on the coast, that have that knowledge, that have that interest, and the benefits. We will all reap that benefit as British Columbians, and a model for the rest of the world.
And our next question will come from Richard Zisman from Global News. Go ahead, Richard.
For the Premier, but it may be more appropriate for Minister Cullen or someone else there. There's a study out that showed an estimated more than 800,000 herring were killed by BC salmon farms in 2022. How concerned is the province about this, and what can be done, if anything, to help protect those sort of fish populations, considering this was a huge spike compared to what we've seen in the past?
Well, British Columbians want to ensure that all of our marine industries are sustainable, and that includes the aquaculture industry of all stripes, everything from seaweed to mussels, geoduck, salmon, otherwise. For the net pen fish farms, I think it's safe to say that the social license for those that just sit in the ocean and cause the death of other fish is expired in British Columbia. We know that those have to move into closed containment systems. The industry knows they have to move in that direction. The federal government knows they have to move in that direction. And that is why we continue to advocate for support for the industry to be able to do that, and for DFO to ensure that that is something that is happening. There are a lot of coastal communities that are dependent on the economic activity of aquaculture that would benefit from closed containment systems while protecting fish, and that is the direction that we know the province is going. The federal government is going, the industry is going. We all just need to work together to ensure that that's delivered. On the specific issue of the fish kill, Minister Cullen will.
Thanks for the question, Richard. Questions like this, the effect on other fisheries and the integration of the decisions that we make as a province with First Nations partners is exactly the reason that we need programs like this in place. The marine conservation planning, all of that work is what enables us to be able to answer these questions more fully. To the specific question on herring, we're reviewing the work that you talk about. I know Chief Slett's leadership on herring in particular from the health community has been legendary through the years, and allow her to speak to that. But more broadly, bringing back and restoring the healthy ecosystem that First Nations peoples have stewarded since time immemorial, bringing back the abundance we know allows for better conversations to happen. When we're in a time of threatened species and scarcity, conflict is only natural to arise. And as the Premier said, we are working with our federal partners. I'll be hosting the federal minister here next week. She's new to her role there, and bringing her up to speed on what the needs of British Columbia are, which have been very consistent in supporting communities and making sure that wild salmon are supported and brought back to abundance here in British Columbia. We're doing our part. We, of course, need our federal partners to step up and do theirs as well. Chief Slett.
Thank you for that question. Herring, we have a spawn-on kelp fishery in Heiltsuk Territory, and similar to others on the coast. And the time to step up and protect the species is now. We really don't have time to not take any action. The work that we're doing, the announcements made today, the investments into our communities will all support the restoration and the protection of our ecosystems and species that are close to being extinct. And we can't be having conversations after the fact where, we could have done something but didn't. So, we're really pleased to be here today. These fisheries, support our communities, with food security, food sovereignty, and, are the economic drivers of our community. So working in partnership with British Columbia and other partners is really important to us. So these conversations are in the positive and not, we're not talking about something that once was.
And Richard, do you have a follow-up question?
For the Premier, City of Vancouver is discussing today service fee increases for ride-sharing companies that, in essence, would help bring in revenues for the city. But is now a time for municipalities to be looking at things like this to nickel and dime British Columbians or local residents based on high cost of living?
Well, I'm not familiar with the proposal that's been brought forward by the City of Vancouver. For the province's part, we recognize that this mode of working, gig-based work, is one that needs to ensure that it's consistent with the protections and the expectations of British Columbians in terms of the treatment of employees, in terms of the sustainability of the operations, how they're managed. So at the provincial level, we brought in requirements for these companies to ensure that their employees have access to WorkSafe, so they get injured on the job while they're making a delivery, that they're protected, that they have access to a minimum wage to ensure that they have a dignified quality of life and they're not on the margins of our society trying to scrape by. These are minimum expectations of every company that operates in British Columbia. I'm sure that municipalities have minimum requirements for these companies as well. It's an evolving area. And it's one where we need to ensure that there's responsible governance and oversight. We all benefit from the service, but the service can't come at the expense of British Columbians.
Our next question will come from Katie DeRosa from the Vancouver Sun. Go ahead, Katie.
Hi, Premier. There's recently some data released from BC Cancer that shows that the wait times for radiation therapy have actually worsened. It's now only 75% of people are getting radiation within the 28-day benchmark, lower than May, which was 77%, which even at that time was among the worst waits in Canada. So how do you respond to, the fact that this Bellingham option is opened up, but the wait times are still not getting any better?
Yeah, the wait times, really any wait time for an individual that's facing a cancer diagnosis is unacceptable for them and their families and for me. There are clear clinical guidelines when people need to receive their treatment, and it's my job to ensure that that happens. I've directed the health minister to work with the cancer agency to address wait times that are unacceptable for British Columbians. The stories are horrific that people face, which is why we took the unprecedented step of opening up spaces south of the border at Bellingham, which are now at, if not full capacity, near full capacity. An average of more than 40 people the last 3 months have used those beds. I think we're around 49 people using those beds right now. We've also seen an increase in demand for cancer care. So we've brought on more radiation technologists. We're opening new cancer care centers in Kamloops and Nanaimo. And we've seen a 16% increase in the demand for cancer treatment. And we expect that only to continue with an aging population, which is why we're doing the structural work around the Health Human Resources Strategy to make sure we have the people to deliver this care, and the structural work with BC Cancer to make sure they have the capacity to deliver that care. These pressures are only going to increase across Canada with an aging population. So we're going to continue to work with other provinces as well that are facing similar challenges in the healthcare system. But I want to reassure all British Columbians that we are bringing every available resource to address their need to get this service within the clinical guidelines so that they can rest easy in what must be an incredibly difficult time when you're facing a cancer diagnosis.
And Katie, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I mean, on Twitter, a lot of people shopping for groceries are posting about shrinkflation and that they're getting less food for their money. You know, a box of craft dinner and other items that their money's just going not as far. Like, are there any considerations for the budget of either a grocery rebate like the federal government did, or anything to offset these pressures people are facing?
Yeah, I understand the outrage of families that are looking at a box of craft dinner that used to be 225 grams and now it's 200 grams, produced by a company that so far this year has more than $3 billion in net profits, Kraft Heinz. These companies really need to understand that to continue to post record profits at a time when families are struggling, to shrink the size of the food that they provide, which nutritionally debatable, but an occasional staple at the Eby house, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to British Columbia. It's not acceptable to Canadians, and they are playing with fire because people are struggling while they are making those record profits. It doesn't matter whether it's rising interest rates and the Bank of Canada and the impact that has on housing here in British Columbia, or companies that are engaged in this kind of conduct. Governments of all stripes, rightly, will step up for British Columbians, for Canadians, and across North America. It is not acceptable. And I realize I'm fighting for 25 grams of craft dinner, but the bottom line is that people are on the edge right now, and our government will do everything we can to ensure affordability and support people with the cost of daily life.
We have time for one more question. It's come from Rochelle Baker from the National Observer. Go ahead, Rochelle.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear, thanks.
Okay. I guess this would go to Chief Slett or Mr. Smith. Congratulations on the announcement. Now the Great Bear Sea Marine Protected Areas has been 2 decades of planning in the making. There has been some expression by various nations involved in the process about the slowness of it coming to fruition. Do you have any sense of a timeline of action for making the marine protected areas more than blobs on a map? And what would you need to have happen to make this concrete? I'm assuming we can't wait another couple decades for progress.
I got this one, Premier. Yeah, thank you, Rochelle. I think just by the experience alone of the decades of battle in the Great Bear Rainforest has taught our communities that we can't sit by and watch it unfold anymore. And we have to take a more proactive role to continue to achieve steps like we've made today with not only the provincial government, but I believe it's the 1-year anniversary of the federal government's announcement for the $800 million towards marine and Indigenous-led protection. We just got to keep at it. It's governments change, but our communities don't. Our communities have been here for 14,000 years, as Chief Sled alluded to, and it's up to our communities to keep fighting for the change that we feel we need to see. And that's what you're seeing in announcements like today, is First Nations voices making it into the levels of government to make sure that as these plans and spatial planning exercises get implemented, that nobody's getting left behind. But we've learned how to do it by just building the relationships. We've built relationships at a technical, bureaucratic, and political level now, and that's helped make some efficiencies in how we do business together. So instead of going to politicians to complain about something, we work with the bureaucrats and technical people to build solutions that we can bring to decision makers. And we found that we found more. We found that we found. I need some coffee, sorry. We've seen that we've had more success when we bring solutions other than problems. I don't know, Chief Slett, you want to?
Yes, our communities have been working for decades, fighting to protect our coast, our land, our way of life. So it does feel like a lot of the progress that we make does take time to get to a place where we're at the table having dialogue and working in partnership with BC and Canada. We'll always, be at that front line, fighting for that way of life. And, it's that passion and that strength of our people that have brought us here today. And we know that we're in good hands with our young people going into tomorrow. A lot of the work that we're doing here, we do it through the lens of creating new jobs and economic opportunities for our people to revitalize our communities and our culture, and to rebuild food security and bring people home to healthier communities. That's the bottom line of the work that we're doing here. And it will take time, and we are in it for the long haul.
And Rochelle, do you have a follow-up question?
I'm wondering in terms of, I recognize there's a lot of moving pieces, including treaty rights and sorting out economic development and which areas are most biodiverse. But is there any sense of timeline of bringing the action plan into fruition? Do you see MPAs in a given area of the coast being established in any kind of short-term or long-term? And what's the scope? Are we 3 or 5 or 10 years away from seeing marine protected areas start to be established?
Yeah, great follow-up. I believe we're actually seeing them put in places now. We've seen the Kitasoo announce their Indigenous protected and conserved area. We've seen the Mamalilika Nation bring theirs forward. And so we're seeing kind of a staggered approach of nations announcing their intentions and then working with people to catch up to them. And then we also know that there's plans in works right now that will be announced over the next year. So it's a bit of an evolving process. But as First Nations communities, we've committed to achieving the strategy to have in place by June of 2024.
Dallas is exactly right, as he so often is, about all things. A chief recently said to me that we move at the speed of trust. And a lot of these conversations around how do we make this integrated with the community, with the values, and also speak to the many things that Chief Slett said, the opportunity for young people coming up and the generations to come. So it's a process that moves in area by area, nation by nation. And when we say Indigenous-led conservation, that's exactly what we mean. The province stands in support. We have our objectives that we've shared in the mandate that the Premier has given me and us as a government to achieve. And we do that through those relationships that Dallas and Chief Slett have talked about, moving them forward, making sure that they're durable, that these conservation initiatives include the rights and title holders at the most fundamental level, and that BC stands here in support and brings other partners to the table to make it a reality. So that's something that future generations can count on for the durability for time to come.
That concludes the media QA portion of this event. We're going to ask everyone to stay put, and we're going to set up for some photos up here. Thanks for joining us, everyone.